Welcome, guests. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm still recovering from Daniel Smith last week, um,
Very
but
interesting interview.
got a lot of
Yeah.
great feedback on that interview. She had a lot to say. So, listeners, if you haven't checked it out yet, you might want to go back into the archives and see what the Premier of Alberta had to say about pushing pipelines to the West Coast. Um, Later in the episode today in Strategy Suite, Geoff and I will be joined by Gurpreet Vinning to discuss big events in BC politics. The latest push for a pipeline continues. The latest on a new court ruling that has implications for DRIPA and mining exploration and more, and also the latest in the BC Conservative leadership process. But before we get to that, we have a uniquely qualified guest to talk to us about the BC Conservative Party and what's been happening, John Rustad. John, welcome. Welcome back to Hotel Pacifico.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks for having me back.
Well, it's been quite
Good
a
to see
week.
you.
Yeah,
You
it's good.
look
It's good to see everybody. It has been an interesting period of time, that's for sure.
you look tanned and rested already.
Well, what is it they say when you leave politics, you lose 10 years? But the problem is I haven't actually left politics yet. So, you know, that age differential hasn't happened quite yet.
Well, you can step
Well,
outside and not meet a scrum. I think that's more restful.
yeah.
I don't know, Jeff. I'm still doing a fair bit of media, although that's going to obviously drop off as the story moves on to the leadership race. But I'm not going anywhere, and there's some very controversial topics that I plan to be quite vocal about in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
What would those
Well,
be?
Well, for example, obviously the pipeline, but also, DRIPA, what's going on with private property, and the fact that DRIPA alone will not solve the problem. We're actually going to need a constitutional change. And it's time we start having a serious conversation about just what that looks like.
well,
Well,
Canadians love constitutional debates, so we'll have to come back to that one and spend some more time on that issue.
But that's for sure. It is. It's one of those issues that, in order to open the Constitution, right, you need seven provinces and half the population, or other processes to do it. But I don't see an option for British Columbia. And if the other provinces aren't willing to come to the table and actually fix this problem that we have, then there's other conversations that need to be had.
well, just
Oh,
about you staying on in caucus. It's not, I mean, there are certainly lots of precedents for past leaders to stay on, and certainly on the NDP side, there's a number of them, like Carol James and Adrian Dix, came to be fairly, you know, dependent upon members of the caucus, and Adrian's still today. Um,
I think at one point I had to chuckle. I remember when we were in government, it was we called it leadership row because
yeah.
there was like three or four of them lined up on the
I,
front bench.
I'm not sure Ujjal Dosanjh uh, completely welcomed Glenn Clark as a private member in his caucus very briefly, Geoff. But
no, there was some tensions for sure.
and Gordon Wilson flew the coop before Gordon Campbell had to deal with him. So is there a model you're planning to follow, John? Are you going to be like Edward Heath as a thorn in the side of Margaret Thatcher, or are you planning to be a good team player when the new leader's chosen?
Well, my plan at this point, of course, is as it always has been, make sure that I do a good job representing my riding. And I haven't been able to spend a lot of time in my riding, so that's going to change a little bit. But there are big issues that I want to tackle, and I'm obviously, not going to be creating problems for our current caucus or whoever that new leader will ultimately end up being, because I still very much believe in the Conservative Party and the Conservative movement in British Columbia, and I want to see that successful. So I don't want to try to undermine that, but at the same time, I'm not going to be silenced. I'm going to be out and vocal on issues that I think are important for us as a province.
Do you expect a big leadership race?
I don't know. I really don't know. That depends whether David Eby drops the writ in January, which case it could be a very short leadership race. Or I think it should be at least 3 or 4 months. If it goes longer, 6, 8 months, that's not such a bad thing. But yeah, I think 3 or 4 months would be good. And I'm anticipating there'll probably be three serious contenders, and I suspect there'll be two or three others that will be entering the race to try to position themselves.
Who do you
You
see
said a
as the
moment
serious
ago.
contenders at this point?
Well, I'd rather not say
Okay.
because not everybody has announced their intentions. There's lots of people that are exploring at this particular point, and so It's not for me to be announcing who may or may not end up entering the race.
You said a moment ago you're not going anywhere, but you said that a week ago and wound up deciding to go somewhere after all. What can you tell us a bit about that overnight process? You've spoken a bit about it before, but how you came to the decision to step aside?
Sure. You know, the issue I had some options, right? There was legal options I could have done. I could have just, and I had options throughout the fall as well that I could have done in terms of playing things out. But I looked at it and I thought, having that fight is not going to be helpful for what we need to do in British Columbia. British Columbia is facing some pretty serious situation right now, both economically and socially, with things that are going on, and a a fight, an internal fight, boiling over, which it has been for quite some time now within the Conservative Party, doesn't help the situation. And so I was determined. I went to bed that night on the Wednesday night. I was determined I was going to carry on with the fight. Woke up in the morning and started thinking about it. And as I said, I came to the realization that carrying on the fight was now all about me. And it wasn't about the province. It wasn't about the party. And at that point, a leader and leadership should never be about an individual. It should be about, what is doing what's right for a party and what's right for a province. And so that's ultimately why I came to the decision that having that internal fight is not the right thing to do.
When you look back, it's been an amazing trajectory because you were expelled from the BC United Caucus over your views on climate change, but you then went door knocking and found nobody home at the social credit place you mentioned to us before. You wound up with the Conservatives. You had been with the BC Liberals and the BC United. Were you headed in the direction of the Conservatives regardless, or was it something that was triggered by events? I mean, did you find your natural home with the Conservatives, and what did you find when you got there?
Over the years, I have engaged with the Conservatives, I've engaged with the party, engaged with people, but really from a perspective of understanding what it is that they were and hoping that that could be part of the coalition that was the party that I was involved in, of course, which is the BC Liberals at the time. And I think the real difference for me was when I think it was Andrew Wilkinson, he was leader, and there was a big fundraiser one night. Hundreds of people were at this fundraiser, and he made a joke, but it was taken quite seriously. He made a joke saying, "Oh, well, this is the direction we're going in, and you conservatives, you're just going to have to take a back seat for now." And that really split the party at that point. And that
Mhm.
was back, long before Kevin Falcon took over leadership. And I think that ultimately is what drove a wedge really for the Liberals. And so in 2022, when Kevin won the leadership, I sat down with Kevin and I said, "Look, I'm going to be a team player. I'm not going to create any problems for you. I'll do whatever critic role you want me to do, and we'll see how things play out." And in the back of my mind, when we got into that spring, I had sat down with my wife and I was really thinking, well, I'm just going to retire. I didn't see any hope for Kevin Falcon and the BC Liberals at the time to win government. And I thought, okay, it's probably a time for me to do an exit. And it was the federal government that put forward a paper called the Farm Emissions Reduction Strategy that ultimately drove me to start saying, wait a second, we've got to start talking about this because, my number one priority is to stand up and fight for my riding, and this was going to have a significant impact on my riding. But I kept getting shut out, not being able to talk about it, not being able to have the internal conversations. And ultimately, it was just a retweet, which really is nothing of the issue because I wasn't out vocally, on a, hard on a position. But Kevin Falcon, quite frankly, looked at it as an excuse to get rid of me because he wasn't happy with my positioning where things were going with the leadership race, right, that Kevin Falcon ultimately won. And so it was after that that I sat down and really had a talk with my wife and made a decision to go in a different direction other than retiring. And it wasn't for, obviously I engaged with the Social Credit Party. They didn't see it as being serious, so they weren't interested in opening the door. So that kind of came to an end. And of
Turning
course,
point in history right there.
and it's interesting because they do look back and say, I guess we missed the boat, but in terms of it, but regardless of that, and went off and joined the Conservatives. They had been trying to court me all along, but I knew that the Conservatives had lots of internal problems. I
Yeah.
knew that as a party, they were really out in the wilderness and lots of really challenging issues within the structure itself. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't go there initially, because it was like, there's better options than inheriting that problem. And ultimately, that's the decision I decided to make in terms of resurrecting that party.
Well, one of the narratives is that Aaron Gunn had been refused a chance to run in the BC Liberal leadership, that Falcon won, and you were supporting Ellis Ross, and then when Kevin won, I think Aaron told us on this podcast that had Ellis won, he might have stuck around, but when Kevin won, he decided to leave and put some energy into the BC Conservatives. So my question to you is, when you joined the BC Conservatives, Aaron was there already. I assume he had brought a group along with him. Like, was it basically just kind of the quote unquote Aaron Gunn group, or what is in the BC Conservatives? What are the different, what's the coalition that made it up then that what maybe wasn't apparent from the outside?
Sure. So, I mean, back when Aaron Gunn and Angelo Isadora came in and took over that party, the party had about 500 members and had been they'd spent all their time creating a constitution that, it was just bizarre. No other political party would ever do things like that. And when they came in to take it over, they raised the membership from about 500 to 800 people. And use that additional leverage that they brought in to take over board positions and ultimately take over the majority of the management committee, the elected side of things, and start making some of the changes and the cleanups. And so when I came in, sort of I inherited that component, but there was still an internal fight between the old guard and this new guard in terms of the control side. And then I came in, and normally when a leader comes in, the first thing you do is just clean house. Right? You put your own people in, you clean house. And I decided to take a different path. And ultimately, that became obviously problematic for me down the road. But I decided I would try to keep these two factions within the same party and keep them as within part of the management of the party and try to have this as a true coalition. And so that ultimately, hindsight would have been better just to clean house and bring in a whole fresh people. But I don't know any regrets in terms of it or anything like that. But that's sort of what happened at the time when I came in as leader.
Yes, this week we've got some exciting news to share about presenting sponsor TELUS's Sovereign AI Factory in Rimouski, Quebec. On November 17th, it was announced that the Rimouski AI Factory has been named Canada's fastest and most powerful supercomputer by Top 500, a prestigious list that ranks the world's 500 most powerful computing systems. Not only did the Rimouski AI Factory rank 78th globally, but TELUS is the only telecom provider in Canada to be included on the list. Top 500 measures how many calculations a system can complete per second. Can you guess how many TELUS's Sovereign AI Factory was able to complete? Yeah, the answer is 22.74 quadrillion calculations per second. That's immense processing power. That puts Canada on the world stage for AI and machine learning innovation. In Canada, this means accelerating breakthroughs in healthcare, including complex medical research, drug discovery, and genomic analysis. It means advanced climate modeling that can deliver sophisticated predictions and analysis that contribute to environmental sustainability. And it means supporting Canadian businesses in developing AI-driven solutions that enhance customer experience. This independent recognition marks a groundbreaking achievement for Canadian technological innovation. And it proves that Canadian-owned and operated infrastructure can deliver world-class computational power while keeping control, innovation, and economic benefits firmly within Canadian borders.
What do you think was the takeoff factor for the party in the wider voting base? I mean, was it Polyev? Was it federal issues reflecting back onto the Conservative brand? Was it dissatisfaction with the NDP? What was your reading on that?
So when I ultimately got booted out of the BC Liberals, which then became, of course, the United Party, you could just feel it. And what I mean by that is when you're talking to people in various corners around the province, there's a lot of people that were really not happy with the option that they had. And they were voting for that party because there was no other choice. People were unhappy, with
not NDP. It was not NDP.
But it's looking for something that was not NDP. And then so of course there was the Conservative movement federally, which really helped obviously in terms of putting us on the map. But it was ultimately as we went through, the months after after I took on leadership in March of 2023, that people started really looking and thinking, well, maybe these guys are serious. Maybe there is, a window or an opportunity here. And ultimately, when we got to the election in 2024, we were actually polling above the federal Conservatives in terms of where we were provincially. And so I think the federal Conservatives had a big helped a lot in terms of opening the door. But ultimately, I think it was in British Columbia, it was the desire for change, the desire for something different and something new. And I think you're seeing that really around the world. It's not just in British Columbia or in Canada, where there is, movement. And some of that movement's to the left and some of that movement's to the right. But a lot of that is a lack of confidence, a lack of trust in government and government institutions and looking for change.
So you get to this amazing point, which I don't think we've heard your side of, where BC United is completely in the tank, down in single digits, and you tell us how that Kevin Falcon is prepared to collapse his campaign in support of yours. How did that work out? What were the personalities and issues that you guys discussed at that point?
It's an interesting story, quite frankly. The back and forth between the two parties over almost a year, 8 months, was we're not interested, or we're only interested if we're dictating the terms, and then that sort of evolved to, well, we'll just have all of our candidates run and you guys can have the other ridings, to, well, maybe we can have some sort of conversations. All of that, of course, was rejected. It was ridiculous. That was completely unworkable, the situations. And during that period of time, the fundraising component had really dried up for the BC Liberals or the BC United. And that put them in a very difficult position because they had a fairly high burn rate going into election. They had a bunch of advertising and things that were going on, and the revenue wasn't coming in to match it. And so when it got to really in June, it became pretty obvious that there was going to have to be a shift. This was unsustainable. And Kevin then decided to carry on anyway. And ultimately that then led to end of August. And at that point, at the end of August, I was like, let's not even worry about having conversations. We just got to fight this fight. And that was, I think, the executive of the party. There was a couple of members of the executive party got member with a couple of members from our side and had a conversation. And I got a phone call saying, look, they're serious. They want to do this. They want to do something. And so we thought, okay, that was on a Sunday. And so they got back together again on a Tuesday. Kevin showed up for that meeting. About halfway through the meeting, I got a phone call and saying, we've got to have a meeting. Kevin wants to meet with you to try to close this arrangement. So it was really just over a couple of days. And I was out on the road and I said, well, the earliest I can get together is 9 o'clock. So we agreed for 9 o'clock that evening to get together. And so Kevin and I sat down and talked about it all for about 2 hours. And we came to an agreement to do it. The next morning, we finished the details and announced it. So it came together really quickly at the end, but it was quite a tumultuous process that went through over the 8 months prior to that.
Well, obviously, you had all the leverage at that point. Was there a point earlier on, though, that you thought that a merger of equals or more of a balanced deal might have happened?
No, because there was never a willingness to really have a good conversation. It was always viewed as being, well, we'll allow the Conservatives to do something, as opposed to, let's figure out how we could actually do something together. And so the attitude was always, very much looking at the upstart as being, we need to be brought into line, as opposed to understanding where the mood in the public was for the shift in politics in BC.
You said earlier, and I think it's an interesting insight, that you had sort of two factions as leader. One was the founders, then there was the newcomers. Now you have a third faction, really, which is the people that you agreed to accept from the BC United slate. But you didn't take everybody. You refused to dump some people that it seemed like Kevin Falcon would prefer you didn't back. Did you find yourself in a more fundamentally unstable situation then, with all of these disparate currents coming together in a single project?
Yes. I mean,
Could you expand on
hindsight's
that?
hindsight's 2020, right? At the end of the day, well, should I have just not taken anybody? Would we had 30 independents running instead of the five or
Yeah.
six that did run? I don't know. It's hard to know how things will play out, but it did change the tone significantly in terms of who we were as a party, with the merger, and not because the people that came in weren't conservative. It just there was still the hangover of what happened with the BC Liberal / BC United Party that always stuck with our caucus and with our party.
But you really ran the table on popular vote, from I think 44% of the vote maybe, or I can't remember exactly what your popular vote was, but
I think it was
42%.
44, 43 or something like that.
Yeah,
It
you were
was
you were
essentially 1,000 votes would have meant we would have had about 50 to 52 seats.
right, and you were in that range where BC Liberals had formed government in the past from a popular vote perspective. So thinking back to the 4 weeks in the RIP period, what was your emotional roller coaster like? Maybe it wasn't a roller coaster, maybe it was a straight line for you, but what do you, when you think back on it, do you recall kind of like you had all the momentum, but then you felt a setback and then you came back, or like, how,
Yeah,
how do you process that emotionally looking back on it?
and I think the biggest challenge was for us is we had such a new team that was running the election,
Yeah.
and we didn't have a lot of experience. We brought in some people from outside of the province, people that didn't really understand the province. We tried to incorporate some of the BC Liberal folks as part of the structure. Some kind of came in, were able to help. Some actually created problems for us, and we had to change them out and things like that. But I mean, ultimately, I would say that we didn't have a great team. We had a pretty good team, right? A lot of young people, a lot of energy, but there was lots of things. Going back and looking at it now, I would have done the election very, very different from the way that we did during that time. But that's experience. That's just how things play out.
Yeah.
What would you have done differently?
Well, I think I had been pushing for more rallies, particularly to start off the campaign and show the momentum going through, and the campaign team ultimately decided they wanted to go in a bit of a different direction in terms of how that played out. So I think that was some lost opportunity just to project the momentum that we really did have for people. The other thing that we did, and this is part of my thinking, that was an error in the campaign, because we were so new and we were putting all this together. We didn't put out our platform early, and so we kept talking about different things every day, and that's a huge mistake in a campaign. In hindsight, we
You weren't
should have
talking.
been
You weren't
sticking.
talking a lot about affordability, as I recall.
Well, it's
Like,
the problem is we talked about a whole bunch of things, different
yeah,
things every day. And so
yeah,
we didn't stick to our main message. And so it didn't have the opportunity to really penetrate into the market like it should have, given what we were, because we were so excited about so many things that we're talking about that we wanted to highlight, that we didn't make it boring, I guess you could say, by just sticking to the straight message. The other piece that really surprised me, and it shouldn't have surprised me because I've been around politics a long time, but I was quite taken back by just to the extent of lying that the NDP were willing to do. And there's no other way to call it. I mean, it's not posturing or politics. It was just outright lying that was going on. And to me, I guess that was just something that I wasn't quite prepared for.
did you feel
So
the
when
did you feel that EB pulled the rug out from under you when he abandoned the carbon tax?
No, certainly that was something that would have been nice to have. But that wasn't, I didn't view it as being pulling out the rug or something.
Yeah.
But unlike the federal conservatives, I mean, we pivoted away. We didn't talk about the carbon tax going forward. They started their whole campaign still trying to brand, the current prime minister as being attached to a carbon tax.
hmm
So
You
uh,
just moved on. Yeah.
yeah, I just moved on. I mean, there's other things you have to vote. There's so many things that we were able to push and do. The other piece, though, that I found really interesting is the vast majority of people in this province, 65 to 70% of the people, want significant change in healthcare. They want to have some options. They want the changes that I think we need in healthcare. But the interesting thing is close to half the people, a little over half the people, still think the NDP are the best people to do that change. And that was something I missed because we tried to tap in initially to that whole desire for a change in healthcare. And so it became a significant component that we campaigned on in terms of the changes that were needed. But what I missed was the fact that the majority of people didn't necessarily trust, another party to do that change that they felt they needed in healthcare. And it didn't help that, once again, the NDP just lied outright in terms of what our positioning was on healthcare, and they kept lying to people and sent it out in pamphlets, et cetera, et cetera. Post-election, when we did some analysis, we discovered, particularly in the 60 plus group, that they had bought into the NDP's lies, and that wasn't something that we were able to counter.
On the other side, though, not to quarrel with what you've just said, although I obviously disagree with it, but the opposition bullets that the NDP fired at you basically bounced off you. There was a huge focus by the NDP on candidates, some of their statements in the past, issues about SOGI and so on, which in retrospect did you no harm. What was your feeling as those attacks came?
The public, what does the public care about? There's the personal attacks, there's all this kinds of stuff. And there is some things that do resonate and create some challenges. But at the end of the day, I'm almost, and I hate to be cynical about this, but I almost think the public expect it.
Yeah.
That there is going to be this. And personally, I think going forward, in the next election or election after that, your history on social media won't matter that much. And what I mean by that is people used to have a big deal about, did you smoke marijuana? I remember the famous lines, "Oh, I didn't inhale," right? I mean, all this and all. So, well, now people just expect it, right? And of course it's legal, but in British Columbia, Canada. But the same sort of thing will happen with social media because everybody who wants to run will have said something stupid on social media. Everybody will, and so it'll become normal.
But you did have a bit of
right now.
I agree with Geoff that a lot of it bounced off like a Teflon shield, but you did have to deal with Brent Chapman stuff in the latter stages of the campaign, and because that one was pretty noisy. Do you, not many people go through what you've just been through, a leader of a party having to deal with the sideshow that's taking you off message. How were you trying to deal with that during the campaign?
I think we took a wrong approach on that, quite frankly. And some people are saying, "Oh, you should get rid of Brent." And then some people are like, "We should be hiding him. Don't have him do media." That's the wrong approach. We should have just put him front, out, and center to explain it and walked on, answer the questions and move on. And we didn't, and so it allowed it to fester. Early in the campaign, there was another issue that had come up, and the advisors around me saying, "Don't take any questions from the media. We want to just get our message out. Don't take any questions from the media." Well, that dogged me for 2 days until I finally said, "Enough. I'm going to take the questions from the media. I need to put this to bed." And we did, and put it to bed, and we moved on. Like, it's hiding from something or trying to shield yourself isn't the right way to do it. You just got to come out and be honest and say, "Yeah, I said something stupid," or "That's not what I believe," or "This is what I meant," whatever the case may be, and move on. But unfortunately, that was some of the immaturity we had in our campaign, just the lack of experience in terms
It's always
of how
a tough
to
call.
address those issues.
I mean, it is always a tough call in those situations because you never quite know how bad. I think there's a tendency for optimism in campaigns to say, "Well, go away,"
Well,
and usually it doesn't.
But that's just being naive.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually it doesn't. You have to address it one way or the other. And really, if something comes up, the first thing you do is you make sure you know what your message should be and then get out and deal with it. Otherwise, it's going to be there and it's going to take you off message for as long as it's going to go. It's going to be 2 or 3 days guaranteed. I mean, I'll never forget the campaign in, I think it was 2009, when Gordon Campbell had just an unbelievable start to the campaign. It was going just great. And then in comes the John Van Doggen issue with the speeding tickets.
Yeah. Pretty tame in hindsight. Yeah.
Yeah, red tape in hindsight, yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
it derailed things for a number of
Yeah.
days in terms of the
Yeah.
campaign. And I look back at that and I should have learned a lesson from that one in terms of how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Well, your leadership didn't end on election night. When you look back over the time you had the post, what are some of your proudest actions or achievements? What are you going to tell your grandchildren about?
Well, first of all, unfortunately, my wife and I never had kids, but I might be able
Oh,
to
that's
tell
right.
my grandnieces and nephews
Sorry. Okay.
because
Yeah.
I've got six nieces and nephews and a couple of grandnieces and nephews now. But when I think back at it, really proudest moment I've got is the fact that it had been what 70 years since we really had a serious Conservative Party in British Columbia, and it was almost 100 years since the last time a Conservative Party won a government. And so I thought, for me, that the most important thing was getting this thing up and running, getting us, credible, elected, seeing us through the legislature, showing that we can be professional in doing the job. And to me, that'll be the thing that will always sort of stick with me.
What was your best day in the House as opposition leader?
Well, as you know, right, the best day in opposition is still worse than the worst day in government.
Yeah.
In terms of it, as the old saying goes.
Was there one least worst day that you can recall
Well,
as opposition leader?
there's a number of days last spring, I think, where we were, landing lots of blows.
Yeah.
The NDP were scrambling. It was good in terms of things, and there's moments this fall as well, but there's nothing that really stands out. I think what kind of some of the interesting things was how many successes we had as a Conservative Party. Like when you look at the political landscape and how things have changed in the conversation. For example, on the climate issue, we were the first to come out and talk about it, getting rid of the carbon tax, pushing this whole side of this whole stuff. It's not even nobody even talks about climate change in the legislature anymore. Nobody even talks about that stuff except that it's there and there's a few things that need to be dealt with. But it's no longer mainstream in terms of defining the politics of the day. Same with for example, the issue of safe supply. Revealing, attacking safe supply, that whole side of things, and has changed where government has gone in terms of how it's dealing with this. Now, safe supply is still part of what's going on. They're calling it, something different, of course. But
Prescribed alternative.
yeah. But however they want to. I mean, that's one thing about politics is if something's not working, you just find a way to rebrand it and see if it'll still pass. That seems to be the style of politics, but. When you look at some of these things, those are obviously big shifts that happened in politics that would not have happened except for what we did as the Conservative Party. We also passed, an interesting thing. We actually passed a piece of legislation as a private member's bill going through. That was, I think, the first time in legislative history that all parties supported it and drove it through, that an opposition party actually passed legislation and had it enacted.
You've been hearing me talk a lot about bunkering, and you probably know it simply means fueling a ship. And for more than a century, that fuel has been heavy oil or diesel. But there's a better option. LNG, or liquefied natural gas, is natural gas cooled until it becomes a liquid. In this form, it's compact enough to fuel large ships. Earlier this year, British Columbia made history. The Silver Nova, a state-of-the-art cruise ship, became the first vessel bunkered with LNG in Vancouver, supplied by FortisBC's Tilbury facility in Delta. FortisBC isn't new to this. Riding on a ferry between Tsawwassen and Victoria, good chance that ferry is running on LNG provided by FortisBC. We have 10 marine vessels that are fueled with LNG, 6 for BC Ferries and 4 with Seaspan. It's part of a growing global shift to lower emission shipping. They've safely completed more than 8,000 LNG bunkering operations for customers here in BC. These examples show what's possible right here in Vancouver. But here's the challenge. Unless Canada builds the infrastructure, we risk falling behind ports in the US or Asia that are already fueling LNG-powered vessels. Without infrastructure to support these larger vessels, Canada could miss out on the economic and environmental benefits of becoming a global LNG fueling hub. The Tilbury facility has an advantage. It produces some of the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world, thanks to hydroelectricity produced in BC. Expanding that capacity would not only support shipping here at home, but it would also put Canada on the map as a leader in the international transition to lower carbon marine fuels. Because shipping isn't just about moving people and goods, it's about moving them responsibly, and the opportunity is at our doorstep. Fortis BC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. The experience you went through post-election has its parallels with the BC Liberals of 1991 in the early 90s, where, party comes out of the wilderness, rockets straight to official opposition, and yay, ecstatic about the big wins, and then you all end up in the caucus room together, and most are neophytes, political neophytes. So I can only imagine that the learning curve was very steep for caucus, especially in the early going. Obviously, it's been a challenge to keep that group going in the same direction. And how did you try to manage that, knowing that you've been around for 20 years as an MLA? You had a few veterans in there, but by and large, most people were probably still looking for the bathrooms at the legislature.
Yeah, I think we had 37 new people or thereabouts that were elected at the time. And so, yeah, there was a lot of people that were, had all these expectations of what it was and what it wasn't. And when you got into the grind, things kind of settled in a little bit. But I think the biggest challenge was, like I say, I think we just made the tent too big. There was these expectations of policy and approaches on the left and on the right. We had a number of people that were part of our group that were significantly from the PPC federally, and were very much ideologues. We had a number of people in our group that were wanted to tear it down, and now they're there. They didn't understand how to build. They were still looking to tear things down, and so there were some shifts there, and maybe that's oversimplifying how things played out and worked internally. But yeah, there was all kinds of big issues that were, and I think probably when I think back at it myself in terms of leadership style, everybody has different leadership styles, and mine was pretty passive leadership style, and allowing for people to express their opinions, allowing for issues to be able to come out and have debate or even arguments over things. In hindsight, probably should have ruled with an iron fist, but that's not my style.
Well, you raised this right off the top, so let's try to delve into it a bit. I mean, we had Alea Warbus on the podcast. She's a very talented person. Was your decision to appoint her your House leader a signal that you were sending of outreach to First Nations, and then later the controversies with Dallas Brody? What's your take on the entire Indigenous rights issue? You campaigned to repeal DRIPA. It's back on the agenda in a big way. Just what's your take, and tell us more about your constitutional amendment at the end of that explanation.
Yeah, that's a quick topic to finish off things, I suppose.
Yeah, very light duty one.
Yeah, light duty. Okay, look, the reason I appointed Ali a House leader was just because of the skills that she had. It didn't have anything to do with her being Indigenous or not. She had an interesting skill set that I wanted to give her an opportunity to be able to shine. She has some leadership qualities in her that needed to be fostered, and so that's why I put her in that position. I didn't want to put one of the previous BC Liberal in, and I kind of looked at the existing group and I thought, I want to find somebody with the skill sets that could actually come through and develop over time. So that's why she was in there. But regarding the Indigenous issue, we've gone now to a place where reconciliation is going sideways in BC. And I don't say that lightly because I believe very strongly in reconciliation, particularly what I call economic reconciliation. But reconciliation needs to be a people to a people, not a government to a government. Because if the people are not brought along, all you've done is you're creating resentment, you're creating friction, and that typically doesn't end well. When you look at legislation anywhere in the world, where there's legislation that gives specific rights or powers to one group of people over another group of people, that ultimately has ended poorly, no matter where it's been tried in the world. And so DRIPA has created that here. Now, one might argue that the Constitution has already created that with Section 35 in terms of those rights. There are different rights than Indigenous people have than non-Indigenous people. And that was an attempt to try to fix, a long-standing problem that Canada's had, ever since it formed as a country. But I think DRIPA has gone too far. And when you go back and look at the original debates in the United Nations over DRIPA, it was never meant to be what it's being today in terms of implemented in British Columbia. It was always meant to be a guiding principle. It was meant to be, how you address respect and secure, the minority rights so that they aren't treaded upon by majority or by society going in a different direction. And so what DRIPA has done today, though, is the Crown, that being the province or the federal government for that matter, but the province needs to be able to make decisions based on all people in British Columbia, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. And sometimes that means it has to be able to make decisions that some people may not support or like. And what DRIPA has done is it's created 204 decision makers in First Nations plus the Crown. And the Crown no longer can make a decision because you have to have consensus. And so this is one of the reasons why permitting has been so hung up and created so many problems in British Columbia, especially when it comes to forestry, is First Nations themselves are arguing over who should have the right to even be at the table. So if you have two First Nations, or let's say you've got 7 First Nations that are all with overlapping claims in a particular area, they may not want to recognize the authority of one of the other First Nations even being a decision maker, because then it increases their argument that they have a right to that area. And so they therefore refuse to approve, a permit or whatever the case may be going forward, based not on whether it's the right thing to do, based not on whether trees should be cut or a mine should be open or those sort of things, but based on historical arguments between First Nations. In terms of the territory.
But John, you were minister. You did over 400 agreements, and you voted for DRIPA. What's your proposal? What would you put in its place? Because
Sure.
you're committed to reconciliation. How do we get there?
Yeah, and one of the things, when DRIPA came through the legislature, I actually spoke about this and said this is a problem, and you cannot do it this way. It has to be as a guiding principle. And so those are things that I said in the legislature when it came in. This is why I talk about what I call economic reconciliation. Because if we're going to be making decisions based on land, the general public won't accept that. And we're seeing that now because of the Cowichan decision. And that is going to expand as 120% of BC is claimed, by various titles. You're going to have these overlapping claims with private property and private property rights. And that, to me, is going to end badly in BC. So how do you get to reconciliation? What are you trying to achieve? And I think if you're trying to move from managing poverty to managing prosperity, if you're trying to move from dealing with all these social issues to people, having jobs and success and being able to invest in their culture and their language and respect, and if you're doing this from a perspective that's adding to our economy, so both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike can prosper, then I think you got a very good chance to be able to actually achieve what I believe is reconciliation. And that's what I think it should be based on. But because now we're stuck on this land question and we're not looking at it from a perspective of what is the goal to be achieved, that's where things are going sideways. And I think, quite frankly, reconciliation is taking a step backwards, because now you're getting friction, just like I said it would, when you have this type of legislation coming, and you're getting resentment. And that will make it almost impossible to actually move forward with reconciliation.
But Section 35, tell us about that. You want to reopen Section 35?
So I want to actually enshrine private property rights in the Constitution, so that Section 35 doesn't override your private property rights. Because private property is the foundation of our economy. It's the foundation of much of our society. You can't have two different groups having the same exclusive rights to the same piece of land. It doesn't work in terms of it. And so we need to fix that problem. And I also think, quite frankly, we may need to actually look at Section 35 as well. I don't think we should repeal it. Some people are saying that we should just repeal 35. We still need to address these historic problems that we've had in terms of our country and how we have been, in cooperation and working with nations. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that leaving it up to the courts is the right answer. When Section 35 was brought in 1982, everybody was asking the question, what does this mean? And the answer was, it's an empty vessel that the courts will fill. And the courts have filled it. So we have a pretty good idea of what Section 35 should be based on courts. Why don't we now enshrine it and define it instead of allowing the courts continually, evolve in terms of their particular opinions of what Section 35 should be?
John, in the remaining minute here, bringing it back to the legislature, there'd be a leadership race. Now, a number of these candidates come from outside the legislature. Would you consider lending them your seat if they one of those people wins the leadership?
It's a possibility. I'm not sure whether somebody would want to run in the Chaco Lakes. I'm also not sure if the Chaco Lakes would accept somebody, particularly from the Lower Mainland.
Right.
This is a riding that is pretty proud about its area, and wouldn't necessarily support the idea of somebody from outside. So those are conversations that need to be had down the road. But like I say, I'm not planning to go anywhere. I'm planning to stay involved with our caucus. I plan to stay involved with the party. I'm likely going to be involved in one fashion or another in some fashion with the leadership race and the outcome of it. So, we'll just have to see how the cards unfold in the coming weeks and months ahead.
How about your old friend Ellis Ross? Do you think he might show an interest in this?
He might. I've had a conversation with Ellis since I've stepped down, and just to feel out what his thoughts are. And I know he's looking at it. Right now, I think there's about 8 to 10 people that have expressed interest, and I've talked to a number of them at this point. Ultimately, like I say, who runs, who doesn't run, we'll have to see how that plays out.
Okay.
You made it a job everybody's trying to get.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
a small thing.
I say the more the merrier. There's more to talk about. Well, John, really appreciate you coming on, especially given what a crazy week you've had. I want to wish you all the best to you and Kim for the holidays, and also to Biardi, who she is never far from our thoughts at Hotel Pacifico.
I appreciate that, and to both Geoff, to you and Mike, Merry Christmas. Thanks for having me on. And I can tell you something. There's a few other topics that I'm looking forward to talking about in the future. So we may have an opportunity to carry on a conversation like this in the not too distant time.
Well, if you
Excellent.
have some
Excellent.
spicy takes to bring in 2026, we'll be happy to have you back.
Well,
100%.
I have as you know, I'm not shy about saying things that are somewhat controversial. So.
Yeah. Well, the more trouble you can cause Trevor Halford, the more likely we'll have you on the show. So there you go.
Well, my goal is not to try and cause him problems. Yes, I do. We've got to get through this, and the real question mark in my mind is, will the NDP try to take advantage of this leadership race and try to drop a writ?
Yeah.
I've heard some people from their party, from cabinet ministers, who have suggested that they might. Personally, I don't think they will. But you never know. Politics in British Columbia has had a way of being pretty turbulent from time to time.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, I would say, if I were the NDP.
Yeah.
Well, John, we'll let you go. Thank you again, and we'll see you in
Best of the
2026.
season to you. Thanks very much, Joe.
Best of the season. Merry Christmas.
The Port of Vancouver is used to shifting conditions, and this moment is a shift like no other. Trade rules are being rewritten. We need to adapt to move more of what Canadians make, grow, harvest, and mine to more customers around the world. And the biggest opportunity for Canadian businesses? Selling more to Indo-Pacific markets, a region that'll make up half the globe's GDP by 2040. That's billions of customers in Japan, South Korea, China, who want what Canadians make to feed families, build cities, and power economies. The good news? The Port of Vancouver is uniquely poised to step up. Why? Diversification and First Nations partnerships have long been its strength, and its growth plans are designed to meet this moment. And with a one-of-a-kind project like Roberts Bank Terminal 2 set to build new industrial land, unlock $100 billion of container trade capacity annually, and create tens of thousands of construction, longshore, logistics, and other jobs, it's ready. Because it's not just about moving goods, it's about moving Canada forward to deliver the true north far and wide. To learn how the Port Authority and its partners are working to deliver for Canada, visit portvancouver.com/delivering for Canada. Okay, back in the strategy suite now. Hey, Geoff.
Very interesting conversation with John Rustad.
Yeah, that was. And, I was last weekend, I was at the East Van Panto on Commercial
Yeah.
Drive. You might be surprised that I was at the East Van Panto, Jeff. I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe you're not surprised.
you got very broad taste. I know that.
And it was as I was listening to the show, which was very funny, and I go every year. It was very funny. It's political satire. It's called East Van Panto, West Van Story, which had a few stereotypes of people from West Vancouver, I might add. I'm not sure Mayor Sager or Mayor Sim would have naturally enjoyed some of the content. But I was thinking, who are the types of hoity-toities that would sponsor this event? And then I looked through the program, and it's Geoff makes. Okay, so there.
I didn't sponsor the whole event, but I am a supporter of the cause.
Well, you are.
But anyway,
a supporter. So I noticed your name in the program.
We've got a great guest here.
Propagandizing through the cultural institutions
more important
of
than my
East
minor
Vancouver.
contributions to the culture. We're being blessed by the visitation of Mr. Gurpreet Vinning.
Yes, Gurpreet Vinning. Thank you for coming. Noted political campaigner at the federal and provincial levels, here to lend his expertise to us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be with you guys. You guys have been doing this a lot longer than I have, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to have me on.
Yeah, you're just a young kid. But you've
My
got
beard
a
is
few,
still black, you know?
you got a few things to add.
Ouch.
Gurpreet, are you a soccer fan? Did you catch the soccer finals on Saturday?
I did. I was watching it at home with my kids who got Whitecaps fever, and we were excited. And I still can't believe Sabby hit 2 posts and it somehow stayed out of the net. Unbelievable game.
I know. Well, they had a good run, and
Yeah.
it was fun to watch. And Vancouver's
Fortunately,
other soccer team
we don't
won
have
the
own goals in
championship.
politics. So it's a lucky thing.
So at least one team in Vancouver is doing well.
That's it.
Okay, so this week we got a few hot topics. And Gurpreet, interested to get your takes on this one in particular, the latest push for a pipeline to the North Coast or any coast on the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
A week later, there's a bit of a polling consensus. Abacus was out, and Nanos were out, and they're both kind of 53, 55, 57% support for the idea of a pipeline to the coast in BC, among British Columbians. How do you think it's hitting out there, Gurpreet? What are you hearing?
I mean, I think it's hitting well so far, Mike. I like if I take a step back from the MOU itself, I think there was a lot of assumptions made of what this MOU was going to be first, right? I think when the first words of the MOU leaked, everyone thought it was specifically just about oil and just about a pipeline. And the MOU itself covers something like 15 different industries. It covers AI data centers, it covers clean tech, it covers renewables. So I think in terms of the MOU itself, I'm not surprised that it ranks pretty favorably, right? Because I think there's a lot of industries that are covered underneath it. On the pipeline itself, I'm not surprised that the majority of British Columbians and a majority of Canadians support it. I think the TMX showed that you can do projects and that you can mitigate any of the safety concerns that you have to pipeline and the transportation of oil, but also from the tanker side. But I also think Canadians and British Columbians, especially today, are at a different spot than they were even 10 years ago, or especially 4 years ago. There's a much more willingness to say we have to do something and we have to do it fast in order to get our economy moving in the face of a sort of a Trump tariff war that never seems to end. And also the economic uncertainty that sort of Canada has sort of forced upon itself.
We haven't heard a lot from the federal Liberal caucus, though, and Poilievre's trying to divide them. Today, it's Tuesday, divide them with a motion in the House of Commons, but some of the BC MPs have spoken out, like Patrick Weiler is pretty critical or sending a negative vibe. it's expected that maybe Jonathan Wilkinson's not too crazy about it, although I think he's so far been fairly measured.
Mhm.
Talib Nur Mohammed. I mean, I know you are familiar with some of the inner workings of the Liberals. What do you expect the challenge to be for the PMO to hold the BC caucus together?
I mean, I think the PMO's done a pretty good job so far because they haven't put the cart in front of the horse and said we are approving an oil pipeline. What everybody's been consistent about is that this is an MOU to work towards that if X, Y, Z, the sort of number of conditions are met. And some of those conditions that you guys talked about, in previous episodes is support from the BC government, support from First Nations, potentially equity partnerships, and also more importantly for the federal government's point of view, the decarbonization of the oil sands via that Pathways Alliance project. So I think if you're a BC MP today on the federal Liberal caucus and you're worried about the MOU, I think your holding lines are, look, this is an MOU. Nothing's being approved, and we'll see if a private proponent comes up. So far, everybody, I think, has gotten to that point. And I think that's where the prime minister sort of wants them, is to bring down the temperature in the room, not to say you're for or against it, but there's a process here so that you can kick the can down the road if a private proponent does really come forward. And then they'll have a real decision to make because now it's a real project and they're going to have to make a decision on it.
Gurpreet, don't you think that, I mean, I appreciate your messaging because I think that's a glass half full kind of take on it. Looking at some of the abacus polling that happened during the week, it seemed to me, though, that David Eby continues to be on pretty strong ground because people shift a bit significantly, actually. I think when they start to think about the tanker moratorium and the wilderness north coast and start to understand that issue more deeply. So while he was furious, I think, with some reason for the way that the negotiations were handled with Daniel Smith, he hasn't emerged from this in particularly tough shape either. Is that your view too?
I would agree with that. I think the interesting thing about this pipeline conversation is that it really depends on which area of the province you're having these
Right,
discussions,
right.
right? Like I like it's such a big difference. And never mind sort of north of BC and the lower mainland. You can split the lower mainland into north of Fraser, south of Fraser.
Hmm.
Like south of the Fraser, that polling has shown those communities are in favor of the pipeline. Even if they had voted for Premier Eby and his team, they are in favor of more natural resources. They're in favor of that energy conversation. North of the Fraser, you obviously see some challenges, right? But you saw that in the last federal election, two MPs in Surrey, Sukh Dhaliwal and Randy Sarai usually win by double digits, 15,
Yeah,
12%, 18%.
squeaked in.
They squeaked in by 3 to
Yeah,
5%. And look, I can tell you that's not because they are unpopular. People love Randeep and Sukh. They are great local MPs. The reason they just sneaked in because the appetite for getting the economy going, it hit home south of the Fraser more than it hit home sort of north of the Fraser. So I think the regional breakdown of these conversations in British Columbia, it's going to play a big role in any next provincial or federal election, Geoff.
Oh, because it's so key, of course, to both the provincial and federal parties of all sorts to find that pathway to victory through Surrey and through the south
Yeah.
of the Fraser. It's becoming the head office for
Yeah.
election victories, and the extortion issue is another one where we see huge problems south of the Fraser, which both levels of government are grappling with. I'm pretty sure people want to hear from David Eby first on extortion before they start discussing tanker bans.
That's it. I think if David Eby were to come into the city of Surrey and talk about an oil tanker ban, I don't think he'd be welcome with open arms. I think people there are saying, look, we are public safety is a real issue in the city of Surrey, all these extortion issues. And after that, it just goes back to the sort of typical issues, right? You got healthcare in Surrey is a big deal, you got
Hmm.
education is a big deal, and you have the economy. So I don't really think the premier's going to be able to sell the tanker ban south of the Fraser. I think he's in a tough position there.
Yeah.
since we're talking about Surrey,
Yeah.
I just noticed in the news today that Mike Starchuk announced for mayor, former NDP MLA, former city councilor. If memory serves me right, I think he was on Diane Watt's slate back when she was mayor.
Well, he's head of the
Um,
firefighters too, right? So he's
and
got a
Yeah.
firefighter,
big
yeah.
base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you've got Linda Annis, who's declared. You've got Tough Grandma Brenda Locke, who's obviously running. And then you've got Doug McCallum, I assume, right? So
Yeah.
Gurpreet, do you have a read on which way Surrey politics is going to go this year?
I don't know. I think once again this could be an election like last time where somebody wins with 18, 19, 22% because it is fairly split still. I think Brenda has done a pretty good job. She fought the BC on the policing issue.
Yeah. Got a
And I don't
ton of
want to
money.
say,
Got a
yeah,
ton of money out of
I
EB for
mean,
that. Yeah.
yeah, she, for all intents and purposes, won. She got the $250 million check. And, she's got another fight in her hands now with the increased sort of budget ask. But I would say, I don't think there are a lot of people too unhappy in Surrey. But with that being said, I think people in Surrey are sort of waking up to the fact that they are now going to be the driving force in provincial politics for sort of years and decades to come. And
Mhm.
I think if I was a resident of the city of Surrey, I used to be, I live in Vancouver now, but if I was a resident in the city of Surrey, I would be looking for my mayor to have that leadership voice, not just on issues in the city of Surrey, but on leadership issues across British Columbia, because that's how
Mhm.
important of an election hub is for any party. So I think it's probably a little too early to sort of see where things are going to go. But I can tell you, Mike Starchuk is not putting his name forward if he doesn't see a path forward.
Mhm.
So, the old adage, campaigns matter, will probably resonate true here.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's maybe just pivot back to the First Nation issues. We just had a lengthy discussion with John Rustad earlier in the show, but what's making news this week is another court ruling um, that I'll just read from a news item. A panel of BC judges ruled that legislation meant to shift provincial policies away from colonial laws toward a government-to-government relationship with Indigenous peoples is legally enforceable by the court. So, meaning the DRIPA legislation is, by these judges, is being seen as this is, you got to follow this as
Yeah.
opposed to just being a guide. Now, Rob Shaw quotes David Eby as saying, who's opposed to the judgment. Eby says, to be frank, it's absolutely crucial that it is British Columbians, through their elected representatives, that remain in control of the process, not the courts. Presumably, the province is appealing the decision. Another decision to appeal following the Cowichan ruling.
Well, no, he said today he's going to bring in an amendment.
Oh, he's going to
Yeah.
amend the legislation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which for all intended purposes is the same thing as appealing the
He's
ruling.
trying
I'm
to
not
change the
like,
outcome. Yeah.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for
Well,
the
I think it's different in
clarification.
this respect, Gurpreet. And I'll seize the mic here a little bit because I was
Yeah,
there when the
Yeah.
please.
legislation came in. But, there's a lot of statements in Hansard, including from the current premier, who was then the AG, as well as the minister at the time, Scott Fraser, plus in the legislation itself, which were all pointing to the fact that the United Nations Declaration was kind of the inspiration for this, but was not being entrenched in provincial law.
Yes.
That the DRIPA, which does not have UN in its name for a very good reason, was going to be based here and was not going to cancel provincial laws or anything of the sort. But that message was not received by the appeal court. It was heard loud and clear at the first level, 2023. So there was no
Yeah.
kerfuffle then when the decision happened. Now at the appeal level, there's two judges saying, wait a minute, we think that this United Nations Declaration is the benchmark, and a dissenting opinion, which is much closer to the government's view, which is that no, this is overreach. This is judicial overreach.
Yeah.
What Eby's got to do now is bring in an amendment, and I was not sure. He has a majority, but barely. He has an opposition who are really using, I think, the demand to repeal the Declaration Act as their tool for unity. That's the one thing they can all certainly agree on right now. So he's got to go back into the House. It's not a happy situation, and bring in an amendment on a core issue for the opposition, presumably he'll be able to prevail with the support of the Greens and perhaps a tie-breaking vote from the Speaker.
Can he
But
count on
it'll
the
be
Greens for this?
well,
I
I
don't know
would
that he
think
I
so.
don't
can.
know.
I don't think Rob
Okay.
Botterill's gonna. Doesn't
I,
seem
I,
like
I
the
th-
type of
Yeah,
MLA that's
okay,
going to
well,
agree to
that's
that.
good. Fair,
I
fair
think
enough.
he's going to need the BC Conservatives in this one, Jeff. I don't. I'm with Mike here. I think
Okay, well, you guys are
anything
scaring
that I
the hell
heard.
out of me.
No, no. I mean, I'm just saying anything that I heard
Well,
from Rob and Emily, they've been pretty clear. They think it's working as intended.
So
the
they would
Greens, you mean?
support.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if they don't support the amendment, then what happens next? It's what I've been wondering and talking to guests about. And Gurpreet, you're the latest, but it's a very important south of the Fraser question too. It's not one that, although we know that there are situations south of the Fraser where indigenous rights come into play. Well, Cowichan for one, but even Surrey Memorial Hospital was held up for a while there was consultation with First Nations. Um, but it's not what they wake up in the morning thinking is the critical question facing the economy.
No.
But it's turning into, in my view, a huge debate, which we have every generation in this province about how we're going to manage reconciliation. And I'm not sure how it's going to play. It's a very tough one for the Premier because Chief Terry Teague, the First Nations Leadership Council, also says this is a huge win for First Nations,
Yeah.
and they are going to be supporting or opposing an amendment, I would think, unless they're convinced by the government to do otherwise.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the business community will be very concerned about the message this sends to investors, let alone the last ruling. And I think probably will join the Conservatives in saying the sooner the legislature deals with this, the better. Now, probably unlikely the NDP will come back before February, but I suppose not impossible. They could recall the House in January to deal with it. What do you think, Jeff? Is that possible at all, or do you think they'll just wait till February?
Well, I think they'll wait because there needs to be some serious political work done here to lay the
Yeah.
groundwork, especially as you guys say. And honestly, thanks for raising it. It hadn't crossed my mind. My assumption was that the Green Party would not want to put anything at risk. This is, although maybe not objectively a confidence matter, it is a crucial piece of the government's legacy legislation and crucial to the future of the province in a lot of ways. So we'll be treated to the spectacle of an extremely critical debate one way or the other. And I don't think that it would be smart to try to rush this into the House before
But
Christmas
if
or
you're
even
the
in
Greens,
January.
though, like for the Greens, like you talked about how this is a unifying issue for the Conservatives, it's also probably a unifying issue for the Greens.
Yeah.
To
Right.
oppose an amendment.
Yeah, to basically go all in on DRIPA, right? To
Mhm,
go all in
mhm.
on like we're fully. I
Well,
mean,
I don't
based
think
on
that
where
that's what
Emily
that,
Lowen's going in her leadership, I would think
yeah.
that she'd be like
This is against
100%.
oligarchs, so
Yeah,
yeah.
this is
Yeah.
anti-oligarch legislation. We need to support it. Um, so more to
Okay, well,
see on
interesting
that.
insight. Okay, I'll redo my math on that.
Now, interestingly, yeah, I think on Monday, Trevor Halford, the new interim leader for the Conservatives, he held a press conference with Alia Warbus, the House leader, to talk about needing to call the House back to repeal DRIPA. And Warbus, she referred that DRIPA should be the guiding document, and she reaffirmed that in her view, Section 35 of the Constitution is what protects rights. And that's just echoing that conversation we had earlier. And although I don't think she was talking about what Rustad was talking about, which is a further amendment to Section 35,
Yeah.
that's the first time I've ever heard that idea lately. But Ellis Ross himself has talked about Section 35 is really what matters. So that's interesting to see her out in front on that. She is the House leader, but given her profile as a First Nations MLA, to take that position is just noteworthy, I would say.
I I thought it was a big deal personally. I
Yeah.
thought to have Ali Warbus out in front with the interim leader Trevor Halford talking about the need to repeal DRIPA. I think it shows, Jeff, exactly what you said. They feel that DRIPA is the issue of the day, but also it's a unifying message for that caucus, right? That there are lots of social issues that they still disagree on. There's lots of maybe factors in the sort of the economic growth areas of the province that they disagree on. But I think everybody in that caucus today is unified on that issue. And I believe in the past, Warbus has talked about the need for DRIPA still, right? Like she was
Hmm.
standing
I think
behind it
that's right. Yeah.
just 6 or 7 months ago,
Yeah.
and saying it's a good piece of legislation. People sort of need it, and now she's moved off of that. Now, look, she's
Yeah.
probably hoping it's used as a guidance document. I think some of her caucus want it completely out of the legislature altogether. But
Yeah.
I think having her out front shows that that's they see a real path to victory as using that as the unifying message.
Well, they'll
Hmm.
be under a lot of tension even still because they've got Dallas Brody on the other side,
Yeah.
looking to
Yeah. Yeah.
dig
They
into
can't
them.
back off now.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So this
Um,
amendment will be a
yeah.
very critical debate, but it'll come unless they have a special session. And as I say, I can't see them doing that certainly before the new year. It'll become part of the budget debate, which also looks like it'll be a stormy one, depending on how well the finance minister is able
Well,
to rein in the deficit.
also simultaneously, and this is a segue to our next topic,
Mhm.
is that this issue is going to probably be a defining issue of the BC Conservative leadership race.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because this is an issue that really gets people on the right motivated. And we've got a few potential candidates that have staked out some ground on these types of issues from Caroline Elliott, who has this group, what are they called? I can't remember, the Public Land
Without
Use Society.
diminishment. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. One of those two.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she has the Substack Without Diminishment,
That's
but
the one. Yeah.
they've laid some ground on kind of the intellectual arguments from their perspective on it. But then you've got Aaron Gunn, who's thinking of running. He's been from more of I'll argue, a populist side of things, has been
Mhm.
around these issues for a long time. Um, so, I expect that's going to put a lot of heat on this because leadership campaigns usually playing to your base. You're not necessarily playing to the broader public. So some of these candidates are probably going to double down, right? Really double down on this.
Yeah. And I think the challenge for David Eby's team is they have to double down on support of DRIPA and the reconciliation issue because that's who they are. And the danger for the NDP team is that it appears to be watering down what was a core commitment both in the 2017 campaign and subsequently. We can argue here, and I would argue that in fact the um, amendment that he's considering will simply maintain the status quo, which was satisfactory until this decision came along. But that's not how it's going to be playing politically. And we heard John Rustad earlier, and others are saying, oh, first Cowich and now this. Holy smoke, the whole world has collapsed. We've got to tear everything down again, start over, get rid of DRIPA, reopen Section 35. And it's replete with slogans that are very hard to manage, like one law for all. And as
Yeah.
John Rustad said, you can't
Well,
put one group in power over the other, by which I think he
yeah.
means we've given too much power to First Nations, and they can't be having that. So this is a very difficult and important debate, and it'll be very interesting and maybe worrisome how it plays out, I think.
One of the things that I'll be looking at in the BC Conservative leadership race, Mike, is does the party, leadership contestants, do what Aaron O'Toole did? Do they campaign on the leadership on the right and then move to the center,
Hmm. Hmm.
or do they try and win the leadership from the center and then stay there? One thing that I thought was pretty interesting when John Rustad announced on Twitter that he was stepping down, he was I found it interesting that he said this isn't a BC Liberal takeover. And nobody had called it that. Nobody in the several days leading
I
up to
noticed
his
that too.
resignation
Well, he might have been
called it.
referring to a tweet from Pierre Poilievre's office, who blamed Rustad's demise on the fact that he was cozy with the federal Liberals, which I don't
No,
think anyone had really
no,
seriously accused him
no,
of it
that,
before.
yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is like, so all of a sudden he says, "Oh, this isn't, a takeover of the BC Liberal Party," and I think that's a pretty good sign of where this
Yeah.
Conservative Party is going to go. Now, look,
Well,
I'm not here to say that's wrong or right. Arguably, they were right on the issues facing sort of healthcare. They were right on the issues of public drug use. They were right on the issues of decriminalization.
carbon tax.
They carbon tax, they were right.
Politically right, you mean? Like they
Politically
were
right.
on the politically the right side of it.
Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
not a policy expert on these, but I will tell you they were
Mm.
politically right
Oh,
on the Soji issue
come
south
on,
of the
Gurpreet. Don't
Fraser.
downplay your skill set.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but what I'm saying is that like
So humble.
they are going to those areas where they found success. So I find it hard that the existing membership base of the Conservatives are going to vote for somebody who is sort of milk toast in the middle, given what their previous policy positions were. I think this is going to be sort of a race
Well,
to the
I've got
right.
good news for you. We have a clipping of the week.
Here we go.
And guess what? It's mine. I wrote it.
He wrote it.
Um,
Yeah.
I have an op-ed in the Vancouver Sun this week on the Conservative leadership race. And what I'm saying is that these guys have one shot to get it right here.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the NDP's 8 years in power. You don't win any points for coming close this time.
No.
They either win the next election or the whole free enterprise spectrum will be traumatized and go into hysterical fits. So I think, I laid out in the piece that they have to find a leader who's not necessarily the best at everything, but it has to be good at everything. They have to be good on the organizational front. They have to be good at raising money. They have to be good at making a speech and doing media and but be exceptional at working their ass off, and having the drive. When I look back on leaders I've worked with, and you would all have examples too, nobody cared more than Gordon Campbell. Nobody cared more than Christy Clark. Nobody cared more than Jean
Hmm.
Chrétien about winning.
Or
And
Glenn Clark. Yeah.
or Glenn Clark.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the relentless drive. And we don't know until they start campaigning, the leadership campaign, what we got, what we're going to see there. So I'm most interested because I don't think there's an obvious contender that rises to the top here. Like, the analogy I was using was back in the 90s where, when Gordon Wilson was shown the door as leader, Gordon Campbell emerged, and Gordon Campbell was clearly the front runner and
Yeah.
ran it, ran the table in that leadership
Instantly. Yeah.
and was the leader for 18 years of the BC
Yeah.
Liberal Party. I don't see someone who's obvious here. So who will emerge during the course of the race and take it? And the danger of having a non-obvious leader is you sometimes end up with someone who's like Andrew Wilkinson, frankly, who won. He started fifth and ended up as first in that race, or Stéphane Dion. You can take another example, or
Yeah.
Andrew Scheer, where it's like you don't really feel like you got the consensus of the party behind you.
Yeah, I would say, if I'm, looking at where the conservative leadership, BC conservative leadership race goes, I think what's just interesting was John Rustad's comments around maybe he made a mistake allowing some BC liberals into the tent, right? And once again, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I think that should show you of what he feels of the old BC Liberal,
Yeah.
Yeah.
some of his past colleagues, and some of that BC Liberal political sort of class or group, right? Some of those operatives, and sort of where they want to go. He talked about maybe he should have started fresh and gotten rid of everybody and sort of not made the tent big. And I think the challenge with making the tent big is that you have to have a North Star that holds people in line. And, Mike, you know better than everyone, the North Star for the BC Liberals was, well, folks, we're in government. If we don't get along, we'll be on the other side. And as soon as they got to the other side, everything imploded. And I
Well,
read your piece and I
yeah.
thought Mike is right. I don't know if the BC Conservatives lose the next election, whenever it may be. I don't know if they'll be able to hold it
Well, with the BC
together.
Liberals, the North Star truly was always the economy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think that's what drives a lot of conservatives. You know,
No,
Mm.
they're
but
driven on
Rustad,
this. They're driven
I
by
agree with
culture war stuff. Some of them are,
Yeah.
anyways, right? So
well,
it's
Gurpreet picked up on a comment I did as well, which is that the tent was too big, Rustad said. We also had Angelo Isidoro making a comment, I guess it was to Jastrow Hall some time ago, but he's made it many places, and he's the director of the Conservatives, that the polarization is desirable.
Yes.
Like the secondary leadership of the party believe in driving that hard polarization. And the question that I have, which maybe none of us can answer, but why was Aaron Gunn unacceptable to the BC Liberals, then the BC United? He then went on to become, he's a force in BC politics, clearly, and has a huge following. What was it that Kevin Falk and others said, no, this guy,
well, in fairness to Falcon, it wasn't his. It
it
was
wasn't his, you're right. I
he was
apologize
Yeah.
for
running
that. But
against him, but it was
but
a
Yeah.
party
would
executive at the
anybody
time.
think it was a serious grounds for vetting him out now? And what was it? I can't even remember.
No, it was his old
Yeah.
comments on Indigenous rights and reconciliation. I think
Which are mainstream now.
well, absolutely. When you go back and look at what he was talking about, it's very similar. I think some of his more comments around the drug decriminalization dates,
Mhm.
debate, which by the way have all proven to be politically right, and also from a policy point of view, we've seen the BC NDP roll
Mhm.
those back. So I'm with you, Geoff. I think the BC Liberal Brain Trust at that time said, look, Aaron Gunn is to the far right, and we govern from the center, and we're not going to be able to get voters in Vancouver and Burnaby if we have a far right
And
leader. Now,
well, yeah, and they'd just gone through an election where the Liberals had fled to the NDP.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there was a big talk of we have to get federal Liberals back. And I still think that's what the BC Conservatives need to do. The funny thing is, federal Liberals were ready to vote for Pierre Poilievre until Mark Carney came along. So
Hmm.
federal Liberals are willing to change their vote. It really depends on what the issue of the day is.
But Gurpreet, I have a question for you though, just on the mechanics of the leadership process. I mean, this is going to be you can join the party now. People can go online and become a BC Conservative member, and will most likely have a chance to vote in the leadership. I think it'll be probably regionally weighted, probably a ranked ballot, I'm guessing. So it's like anybody in BC, as long as they're not a member of another political party,
Yeah.
can join the party and vote on who becomes the next leader of the party. Now, that's an invitation for organizers to go and bundle up a whole bunch of memberships and have some influence in the process. As we've seen, time immemorial, that bushels of memberships come in during these processes. So, what do you expect to see for a party that's at 6,000 or 7,000 members that they where they're going to end up?
I think you'll see a huge push for new memberships. I think you're going to see people who were not BC Conservative members who voted BC Conservative in the last provincial election say they want to say in this party. The last one happened really fast, and people weren't given a say, right, in who the sort of leader was or who their candidates were. So I think you're going to see tens of thousands of new members come online. I don't think they're going to do this via online and pin voting. I think all
Yeah.
the problems that they had with the leadership and with the leadership race and all the allegations of improper membership lists and cheating and
Yeah.
sort of bulk vote buying, I think they're going to do it. What I think is a
Paper,
good
mail
thing.
in, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe even mail in or maybe in person. Listen,
Yeah.
I've been going to leadership conventions since I was a kid with my dad, and I
Yeah.
love a good in-person leadership convention.
Yeah.
So
So
I
do I.
think it. Yeah, I sort of love the floor jockeying and sort of the sort of going back and forth of every round. So I think we're going to see a huge increase in the amount of memberships, and I think that will dictate where the party goes on where those memberships come from. Because I think you're going to see is the membership coming from, north of the Fraser, south of the Fraser, northern BC, the
Yeah.
Okanagan. That starts to become the party apparatus, right? That starts to become the base of the party because that's where they know they have the most members. Because if you're willing to sign up for a membership, Mike and Geoff, you guys know this, you're probably willing to donate.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And political parties need money.
Gurpreet, I know you have a plane to catch. Do you have time to join us in the mini bar for a
Sure.
minute?
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
you've heard the show before. You can either raise a glass or take a shot.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't drink myself, so I'm going to raise a glass.
You can raise a glass of Perrier if you like.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't have anything with me, so this is a
That's okay.
challenge. So, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've sort of, I feel I've done too much talking. So can I pass the glass to either you or Geoff, or no?
Sure, Geoff can go, and then if you
Okay,
think of one, you can come back.
got it, got it.
Mine's be interested. You don't have time to respond to this, Gurpreet, but south of the Fraser, the big issue is extortion. I'm going to raise a glass to the Solicitor General, Nina Krieger, who's new in the job, but the creation of this task force of policing agencies and others to fight extortion is still early days. Maybe they're not going to be as effective as we hope, but it's unbelievably the first time, I think, in BC history we've seen this level of coordination among police agencies. Surrey's had a long struggle over policing, so I hope it's effective because the community out there is up in arms, to use probably the wrong term, but are demanding action. And from everything I hear, this will be an election issue no matter what. So good work by Solicitor General Nina Krieger and others, but doing something that should have happened a long time ago, and it finally is. Let's hope it shows results. So that's my raising a glass to her.
Okay, and I will raise a glass to interim leader of the BC Conservatives, Trevor Halford, former colleague of mine. Trevor has worked in the engine room of BC politics at the legislature, went to the private sector, came back to run for elected office, and elected in 2020, I think. Has had quite an adventure through three different party labels now in his young political career. But you usually don't get elected interim leader unless you have strong support within the caucus as somebody who can bridge the divisions that may exist. And he's not running for the permanent leadership, but it's a testament to the respect that his colleagues hold for him that he's in the current post right now. So, Trevor, congratulations. Wish you well. Gurpreet, did you think of one?
I got one actually.
Okay, good.
It's close to home too, actually. I'm going to raise a glass to the sort of Punjabi community out in Surrey. They are facing huge issues with extortion, and this is a community who is not backing down. They're trying to do what's best for everybody there, and they continue to show up and engage with the police, with the various levels of government. So I'm going to raise a glass to the Punjabi community who's on the front lines of this thing in Surrey and sort of trying to do their best and keep their family safe.
All
Here,
right.
here.
Well,
Good.
thanks to John Rustad for joining us today, and to you, Gurpreet Vinning, for visiting Hotel Pacifico, and thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to bring this episode to you for free. See you next week. BC, you can never leave.